A wave of boomer shooters have been coming out over the past 7 years. The FPS subgenre wasn't even called the boomer shooter back then, and I only knew them as arena shooters at that time. That's just how quickly informal language changes. Now, there's several games that came out in 2018 that caused this renewed interest in the FPS game design of the 90s, and today I'm going to be talking about one that was clearly inspired by Quake. You're watching Rayl Deal Games, and I make new gaming videos every Wednesday and Friday on a variety of gaming subjects. I'm a variety gamer through and through, and if you like the video today, consider sticking around. You may like my other and future work. Today I'm talking about Dusk, the indie game that I associate with a renewed interest in low-poly aesthetics and 3D arena shooters. Project Warlock is the game I associate with reinvigorating 2D arena shooters, but that's one I will talk about at a later date because it's one of my favorite indie games of all time. There's several aspects of Dusk's design that makes it stand out as a true marvel of boomer shooter game design. And of all the indie games I've ever played, this retro FPS feels closer to the vintage greats of yore than most titles that attempt to be a spiritual successor to X or Y. Now, there are many things a retro FPS needs to get right to stand toe-to-toe with the likes of Quake or Unreal Tournament, and those are 1. An interesting and fun weapon suite, 2. Cool enemies to slay, 3. Level design that reinforces high replay value, and 4. Demonic difficulty. At its core root, the boomer shooter is a genre centered on mastery-based progression. That is, the natural progression that players go through by playing the game. It's why games like Wolfenstein 3D or Doom were among the first to have difficulty options, and why carefully balanced difficulty is a super important aspect in the design of a retro FPS such as Dusk. I can say, though, that Dusk does all of these things extremely well, better even than some of the 90s greats themselves, earning it the title of a modern masterpiece. But let's not let that sit and beg the question. How about we dive right in and look at this game's weapon suite? There are 9 distinct weapons in Dusk, which on its own is more than the typical vintage FPS title provides. In my time with this game, I found consistent use cases for each and every one as well. I played Doom 2 for the first time this year, and something I loved about that game is how both the base shotgun and super shotty are both useful in specific situations, and the same thing is true of the dual-wielded shotguns and super shotgun in Dusk. It's mostly a range-based decision, but it is cool that there is an element of strategy in terms of deciding which weapon the player uses. Dusk also straddles the line super well between crafting an unfiltered, unmitigated slug-slinging good time and a case-counting endeavor, as certain weapons, such as the hunting rifle, have a low ammo carrying capacity, causing the player to be a bit more choosy as to when they use it. The synthesis of a scarcity of ammo conjoined with the ability to let loose and sling buckshot left and right is super cool, and actually created situations where I was happy I died right at the end of a murder room because it meant I got to experience the high-octane action of that sequence all over again. Having played many games in my life, I can tell you it is exceedingly rare that such a thing ever happens. Even in my favorite games of all time, Final Fantasy Tactics and Age of Empires 2, I can't say I'm ever happy to have died, so that I had the privilege of redoing certain sections. That just doesn't happen that often, and it is a credit to Dusk's weapon design that this game manages to engender such a masochistic emotional response. Even from Software's Souls games, which are predicated upon the loop of death, rebirth, and multiple attempts at the same challenge, never manages to create happiness with this aspect of their design. They trigger other emotions that make the experience just as fun to play, but yeah, happiness often does not come with failure. It usually follows the success of completing a particularly difficult section. However, in Dusk, I found myself intentionally jumping into pits of death after finishing a hard murder room because I wanted to let loose with my arsenal of weapons again. If it weren't for the weapons, this definitely would not happen in Dusk, but whenever I pick up a retro or vintage FPS, I'm looking to sling some slugs, and this game provides that experience better than most others. The weapons in Dusk are Number 1, the melee weapon, which can be sickles or sword. Number 2, dual-wielded pistols. Number 3, dual-wielded shotguns with a reloading animation pulled right from Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Number 4, the super shotgun. Number 5, assault rifle. Number 6, hunting rifle. Number 7, crossbow. Number 8, mortar. And number 9, the riveter. An absolutely riveting replacement for the rocket launcher. We'd be here all day if I talked about every weapon separately, but there are quirks with some of these that I think are worth taking a closer closer look at. The sword is the absolute coolest melee weapon to ever be put in a retro FPS. It works similarly to the Master Sword in the Zelda franchise, where the player has access to more powerful attacks at full health. By holding a left click, the player can charge up the blade, which will one-shot most mundane enemies in the campaign. It's really only demons with health bars that can survive this, or demons that are introduced to the player the first time as bosses. This is not entirely necessary though, as the base version of the attack will also one-shot many of the mob tier enemies. At 50 morale, which is Dusk's armor mechanic, the player can actually block too, which is an awesome bit of design. The assault rifle is a nice surprise in this game too, as I found it to be a capable sniping tool whenever I found myself low on hunting rifle ammo, or otherwise stingy with the ammo that I did have. In fact, this aspect of the assault rifle prompted me to preserve my hunting rifle more for mid or elite tier demons, because it is far more effective at killing those quickly. Smaller enemy types such as the soldiers die in 2 shots from the assault rifle, making these two things fit together like an arch in a square hole.
Arch. You guessed it.
Arch.
It goes in the square hole.
In terms of railgun style weapons, the crossbow is one of the cooler ones to ever be designed because of how it passes through multiple enemies and walls. I used this many times to kill an enemy I could hear but couldn't see as a result. The weapons themselves are not actually the totality of what players can use in this game either, as Dusk takes a page out of Half-Life 2's book by allowing the player to pick up and throw objects at enemies. Unlike Half-Life 2, the player doesn't need a gravity gun though. I was partway through episode 1 when I realized this because I honestly didn't expect that to be possible. Obviously, I knew picking up things was possible, but trying to throw them never crossed my mind because it's not something games typically let you do anymore. When I tried it out on a whim, I literally laughed out loud in joy because of how this opens up the gameplay. I had seen the soap sticks lying around on certain levels, so I thought it would be funny to see what happens when an enemy is struck with these, and much to my absolute joy, they explode into a jibbed mess of blood and viscera. The only thing more fun to throw than this is the Crystal of Madness, which leaves a green smog cloud behind that makes any enemy exposed to it aggro anything they see, including their allies. Throwing one of these into a room and just listening to the absolute morbid carnage within is one of the most fun aspects of this game. While throwing objects adds to the fun factor of the game for sure, there's also a cool factor the developers clearly wanted to reinforce as well, with the way they allow the player to flip their weapons whenever they choose, which does menial damage when done next to a demon. Hitting a sick flip before blowing off a horned bro's head feels cooler than most things I've been able to do in games released this decade. But what would all these cool gun designs and physics work be without a suite of fun demons to slay? Guns are nice, but without something to shoot at, they aren't really that fun, and Dusk provides the player with loads of great targets to blast with buckshot. There are 18 standard enemies and 15 bosses, which is plenty to kill. In fact, the 18 basic enemies create some super fun murder rooms in the late game and keep the experience feeling fresh. Oftentimes, the different episodes in a boomer shooter just serve as set dressing for where the player is going to do all of their shooting fun. However, Dusk does a better job at establishing and maintaining a tonal consistency for each of its episodes than most of its inspirations and contemporaries, and a lot of this comes down to the enemies that are introduced and available in each. In episode 1, the enemies are the most mundane, albeit possessed, designed demons. Cultists, chainsaw guys, undead oxen, and possessed scarecrows are as mundane as this game gets though, as crazy new enemies are introduced in the second episode. The cowgirl has some techno-horror aspect to her design, and the Wendigo is an anxiety-producing terror on an invisible stick. The way the Wendigo is introduced in a dark, cavernous basement is super cool too, and this actually became one of my favorite enemies. Sound design is something the Dusk developers mastered with this title, as the player is always able to know exactly what enemies are nearby based entirely on the sounds they make. The sounds for the cowgirl, Wendigo, horror, and bone ball causes instant stress, and I love this. The horrors make me laugh with the way they run around waving their arms. Once I got past the initial shock of seeing this disgusting thing running at me, I actually started to treasure my limited time with these guys. They're just so silly. Honestly, horrors running out of the woodwork in a surprise attack is similar to the experience of seeing a spider dangle from a freshly spun line of thread directly in front of your face. Where did that come from? You probably don't want to think about it. Enemy compositions in murder rooms are super important to get right right, and it's clear the Dusk devs tested each encounter thoroughly, because I actually can't name a single room where the synthesis of enemies, available and promoted weapons, and the level design don't mesh perfectly. Even the wave-based level, Dweller in the Darkness, which is my pick for the most difficult mission in the game, demonstrates a great command of enemy implementation and resource availability. This stage, more than any other, prompts the player to exploit enemy behavior as well, since having the demons kill each other is one of the best ways to manage these particular encounters. Demon infighting is something I always look for in a retro FPS, as it is an oft overlooked feature of retro FPS game design, and it's something that adds a lot of texture and flavor to the overall gaming experience. And the best thing about this is that Dusk not only does enemy design and composition well, as the developers paired their awesome gameplay design and demonic compositions with some truly mastercrafted levels. Episode 1, The Foothills, is such a cool section of the game, which is set in a rural cult setting that later transitions to a small town. It's super hard for me to say which level is my favorite in the game because they are all legitimately great, but if you stuck a gun to my head right now, I'd say Mission 9 Ghost Town is the best from the Foothills. I'm in the minority of people that really like the city levels in Doom 2, and the city levels in Duke Nukem 3D are so iconic as well. I think it's for this reason that I like the low poly city aesthetic, which is done super well in this level. A level that is also just super fun to explore. One of the biggest issues with Doom 2 from a campaign standpoint is the lack of cohesion that exists between missions. And while that's not something I personally have a problem with, it's a critique of that game that I think has some serious validity. Dusk doesn't have that same issue, and as a complete package, Episode 1 is perhaps my favorite from the whole game. I typically don't find mines to be a great or fun setting for games, however Dusk utilizes the cramped, dark environment to great effect, as seen in Mission 6, the Cuddy Mine. Level design in a retro FPS, in order to truly pay homage to the greats of old, needs to prompt replayability. At every level in this episode and the others are things that would be fun to root through again. Darkness as a game mechanic is something I personally love to see, possibly because of how much I love survival horror experiences. Within the boomer shooter space, darkness is not always a core mechanic of any particular game's design. However, Dusk utilizes light and shadow to obfuscate enemies and to increase the tension caused by needing to move in the dark. Have you ever walked in the woods at night? It's a biological human fear to be alone in the dark at night, probably because of how many of us have died since the days of prehistory to tigers, bears, and such. Episode 2, The Facilities, uses darkness to great effect. To be sure, the whole game is great at this, but The Facilities uses this with a nuance that I quite like. For example, in Mission 2 Unseen, the Wendigo is first introduced to the player. Now, this Wendigo area in the level is not the darkest area, but there's a cool cinematic feel to the zone. The vibe is just great. The industrial framing of the locales in the facilities plays well with this darkness aspect of Dusk's design. Episode 3, Nameless City, is definitely the most creative of Dusk's trisections. Mission 1, the Iron Cathedral, starts out as a stealth experience, as the player is only given the sword as a tool to combat the possessed multitudes. This foundationally changes the feel of Dusk in a crazy cool way, and the design of the level lends itself to a melee smashing good time. Mission 3, City of Shadows, even has an underwater combat section, including a boss. Now, I've always liked water levels in games, and Dusk does have a fun boss fight and murder room within this wet world. I don't think the game needed to take this any further because this implementation of water mechanics is competent enough. The reason I bring it up is because of how unique it is within the context of this game. Nameless City is so loaded with these unique one-off game mechanics that it makes it really stand out amongst its compatriots. In terms of cinematic flair, Mission 5 Blasphemy has this massive blood tornado that tears through the level, and this is honestly such a cool set piece. Unlike what might exist in other modern games, this is diegetic and immediate to the player. It's a surprise that the player gets to really take in and avoid at their own leisure. Mission 7 Homecoming is perhaps my favorite level from this episode, though because of the way it plays with gravity, which is something I love when games play around with. With each of these episodes, the levels are tonally consistent within the context of the atmospheric storytelling they're going for, and is further bolstered by being particularly intriguing and full of fun pathways to root through and murder rooms to enjoy. So with great gameplay, enemy variety, and masterful level design, the only thing Dusk needed to master to be a true highlight in the history of gaming is difficulty. I played through Dusk on Cero Miedo, which is the second highest difficulty the game offers. This felt perfect for me, and that's because I played so many of these games that I can really only enjoy boomer shooters at the equivalent of Ultra Violence or Nightmare difficulty. Cero Miedo is easier than Nightmare in Doom Eternal or Doom the Dark Ages on a first playthrough, but it is perhaps a bit more tough than Ultra Violence in the first two Doom games. In this way, I would have liked it to be a bit tougher, but it definitely isn't too easy. Boomer shooters are one of the only gaming genres that does difficulty as scaffolded design extremely well. It's the thing that retro FPS games and character action titles have in common. That being said, I just played the game as a base experience on Cero Miedo, and that's not where Dusk's difficulty ends for someone like me. For other people, the easier difficulties very well could be perfect, and I could definitely see how lowering the damage threshold for enemies and the damage they deal would make the game far easier for someone relatively new to arena shooters. For someone that's finished the game and wants a bit more challenge, Dusk has completion challenges for each level that really rack up the difficulty. Each level has completionist, pacifist, untouchable, and low-tech achievement plaques for players to earn. Completionist requires the player to find all secrets and kill all enemies, rewarding players for being thorough in their exploration. Pacifist is earned by finishing a level without killing any enemy, which absolutely would be a challenging puzzle to solve guideless. Low-tech is awarded to players who finish levels while only using the melee weapons in the game. And because of how it is possible to avoid all projectiles in the game, this would actually be crazy fun, albeit super challenging to complete for some levels. Even harder than this would be the Untouchable award, which is only earnable by finishing levels without being hit once. Playing on Duskmare is the best way to approach these particular challenges, since getting hit once leads to death in that mode anyway. The fact that that mode exists is super cool too, and shows how the developers really honed and took care to craft a difficulty framework that's great for new players, veterans, and people that want to truly master the game backwards and forwards. In addition to this, Dusk has a multiplayer mode, Dusk World, and an endless mode, which is a wave-based survival mode. All of this means that purchasing Dusk is going to leave the player with an insane amount of content that doesn't require any mods or player-generated creations. Mastery-based difficulty is honestly super hard to get right, and it's something Dusk just has a perfect implementation of, and as such, David Szymanski deserves every accolade he's ever gotten and will ever get. I end each one of my reviews by answering the question, will this game make my top 100 of the decade of its release? If it weren't obvious, Dusk is going to make my top 100 of the 2010s list, and it will be entering in the red category. For those of you new to the channel, games go on my various top 100 lists in either a blue or red category, and the colors mean different things. Red means the game is not likely to leave the list whenever I finalize it in the future. Dusk is truly one of the best FPS games, retro, vintage, modern, it doesn't matter, I have simply ever played. And honestly, I'd love to revisit the game and go for the 100% completion, as close to guideless as my brain can handle at some point in the future. It's quite possible that this game is a candidate for my top 100 games of all time, which is not a list a game has gotten on in a long time. For me, this is a modern indie masterpiece and a true delight. And that's the video, gents. What do you all think of Dusk? Let's discuss it below, and while you're down there, consider smashing that like button, subscribing, and ringing the notification bell. I make new gaming videos every Wednesday and Friday, and you may like my other and future work. And if you're in the mood right now, maybe check out some of my other videos on the screen. Regardless of what you choose to do, thank you for keeping it real with Rayl Deal Games. Have an awesome day, my friend.